Philadelphia is a very dense city. In fact, among American cities with a population over 1 million, it ranks behind just New York and Chicago in its density. So why then is there a huge, completely vacant area of roughly 24 city blocks just 5 miles from city center? The story of Logan Triangle is pretty simple, so if you don't want to watch the whole video, here's the short version. This area of North Philly was outside of downtown back in the day when Philly was still growing. And for the second half of the 1800s and early 1900s, it was used as a dumping ground for coal ash. Over the years, the ash piled up so that in some places it was 30 to 50 feet deep. But then as the population continued to boom, builders began to look for sites further and further from downtown, until finally they reached the Logan Triangle area. Being the early 1900s, there wasn't really that much concern for things like soil toxicity or the inevitable shifting and settling that would occur by building on loosely packed piles of coal ash. So the builders began to build homes here. And before long, the area was a densely packed and thriving neighborhood. The first sign of trouble was a gas explosion that rocked the neighborhood in 1959. The unstable and constantly settling soil had led to a ruptured gas main, which subsequently blew up. Repairs were made, but at the time nothing was really done to address the underlying issue. A second explosion decades later in the 1980s was when people really began to wake up to the issues that the neighborhood had. The Army Corps of Engineers was called in to assess the situation, and their assessment was pretty bleak. Over 1,000 homes were considered unstable due to being built on the unstable coal ash, with nearly 24 at imminent threat of collapse, according to the report that the Army Corps of Engineers did. Stabilizing the area would likely cost $50 million or more, and additionally, the soils were loaded with heavy metals and other toxins, something that, although it wasn't as immediately threatening as explosions or building collapses, was very problematic nonetheless. So at this point, the city decided to aggressively encourage people to move out of the area, and over the next decade, most would. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, there were hundreds of homes demolished, but unfortunately, today the site sits as a trash-strewn open field. Virtually nothing has been done to improve the site since all the demolitions took place. The old street grid is still there, but a number of the streets have been blocked off to try to discourage people from doing things like illegally dumping trash and partaking in other illegal activities. So despite all this time sitting idle, there hasn't really been any progress, and doesn't seem to be much progress on what it might be in the future. Some people have suggested mixed-use developments, other people have suggested a youth sports complex, and still others just a park. But there's still the underlying issues that haven't completely gone away, so it's not really clear what the best option is. This is just a quick overview of the timeline of when all the demolitions took place. As you can see, this is in 1992. From 1992 until 1999, that's when a lot of the demolitions took place. Then they continued into the early 2000s, and by 2002, it was pretty much empty with just a few random houses scattered around. Now, based on this other map that I have, which I'll put up on the screen, this section between Wyoming and Cortlandt Street was the area that had the deepest coal ash, so that was probably the most affected. It was something like 40 to 50 feet in that area, whereas some of the other areas were only 10 to 20 feet deep. Now, once the early 2000s rolled around, not a whole lot changed, and for much of the next 2 decades, and even to the present, it's just been an open field, semi-maintained, and I'll get into that more at the end with what I would do with it and play a little armchair urban planner, but for now, you just can see that here's 2008 open field, 2016 open field, here's 2020 open field, so nothing really changed in the last 20 years. Now we're coming back through Logan Triangle. Got off into the neighborhood a little bit. This is the next street up. This kind of cuts right through it, and it's to either side of us right now, and a lot of the little cross streets have been shut down to try to keep people from illegal dumping, but it hasn't really worked because they just dump the trash at the spot where the street's shut down, so it hasn't really had that positive of an impact. Turning back in, here's a good example of the kind of dumping that you see pretty much every other block. Mattresses and dressers and sofas. And it's unfortunate because it takes what could be a very productive, useful, positive thing for the community, and it makes it into a shitty pile of garbage. Here now I'm back into the row houses, and again, you can see how dense it is. So the thought of having some open green space that's at least reasonably well maintained would be awesome, but they don't seem to want to do it. And it would be one thing if they had big plans to build something in the next couple of years. I could see them holding off, but that area has been undeveloped for 40 years now. It was demolished, or 35 years. It was demolished in the beginning in the late 80s into the 90s, and it was pretty much all gone by the year 2000. So with these dense neighborhoods, it seems like it would be a great thing to have 35 acres of wide open space that people could run around and kids could play and people could take their dogs for a walk and things like that. But unfortunately, despite the 35 acres being almost completely wide open, it's virtually useless because it's so trash strewn. There's drug paraphernalia everywhere, and there's piss bottles, and just, it's not a pleasant 35 acres, which is a shame because all it would take, they have to clean it up anyways every time someone dumps trash. So it's like if they would just make an effort to get it something that they could sustainably keep clean, as opposed to constantly just plugging holes, and you got a nice little junkyard going over here. It's just kind of a shit show, really. So what to do with the site? That's really the big question. There's been a number of unsuccessful pitches that have been made to try to improve the site. And I think it's important that people keep a realistic perspective. A lot of these ideas that have been pitched in the past didn't pan out because they were just a little bit too extravagant. It's important to be realistic with what you're dealing with at this site and the site-specific issues. It's still plagued with failing infrastructure, challenging geotechnical issues, and toxic soil issues. The surrounding area is a relatively high crime area with a population that's been shrinking for some time now. So with all this in mind, grand multi-hundred million or even billion-dollar redevelopments that have been pitched in the past are, in my opinion, not the right move for this area. To me, the only reasonable answer for this area is to make it into a mix of parkland and urban forests. There isn't much demand for new housing in the area, as evidenced by the declining population of the neighborhood. Throw in the shift to online shopping, and large-scale retail probably isn't a good fit either. So I would take the center of the triangle, which is the area with the most significant fill-related issues, and make it a park. From there, as a city, I would give away lots around the periphery of the triangle to local business owners who are willing to open a business there. These happen to be the least affected areas by the fill and are also the areas that are most directly facing the surrounding neighborhood. So it seems like a win-win. The focus would be neighborhood-oriented businesses like coffee shops and diners, and business owners would be required to meet certain conditions in order to get the land, like opening within a certain time frame. And even though the population in the area is shrinking, there's still around 15,000 residents within walking distance, so there should be more than enough people to support a few local businesses. For the park itself, I would keep it simple. First and foremost, clean up the area. Put clean topsoil fill over the cross streets that are no longer being needed and the other areas of the Central Park section. This would act as an even bigger deterrent to dumping than the intermittent concrete barriers that are currently in place, and it would allow vegetation to grow where it previously wasn't able to because of the concrete roads. Also, it has the added benefit of acting as a cap on potentially contaminated soil. Because of the vast amount of potentially contaminated soil that sits beneath the surface, fully removing it is probably not going to happen, and it may actually do more harm than good by disturbing the potential contaminants. From there, I would plant trees, do basic landscaping, add a few low-maintenance sports facilities like maybe a disc golf course or pickleball courts or something like that, maybe some walking trails, and these trails could actually be tied into some nearby parks to create a more cohesive system and encourage people from outside the neighborhood to come in on the trails. The goal would be to make the park an easy and peaceful place that people would want to go to. As more people come out, there's more eyes on the street, potentially to act as a deterrent to illegal activity. It would also be key to add a few security cameras and work closely with law enforcement to aggressively pursue people who are illegally dumping and doing other illegal things. The area has gotten such a reputation for being a free dump zone that the municipal government needs to take firm action to change the perception of the area. This would absolutely cost money in the short term, but I think in the long run, it would be a big enough benefit to the community, and I think it could actually save money through reduced maintenance, increased tax revenue from the businesses, and hopefully a significant reduction in all the costs associated with illegal activities, particularly the illegal dumping. And for all this to work, the community needs to be on board with it, whatever the site turns into. And while I think the city bears a large part of the responsibility for this particular mess, no matter what they do, in order for it to be successful in the long run, the community has to be involved and they have to do their part. So if you've seen my previous videos, I probably am starting to sound like a broken record. But what it seems like they're doing right now is kind of the worst of all worlds. They're maintaining it to a level that's costing them money, but it's not making the area useful or attractive. It's cleared enough, but just enough to make it a hotspot for illegal dumping and other questionable activities. This is yet another example of a city not doing anything and just leaving a site in limbo for decades. If they want to redevelop it, they should redevelop it. If they want to turn it into a park, they should do that. But what they shouldn't do is keep this semi-cleared mess of an open field for the next 2 or 3 decades like they did for the last 2 or 3 decades. Make it a desirable place to go, whatever it ends up being, so that the community can get involved and play a role in making it vibrant. That's all for this one. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you found this interesting. New videos coming out every week.